Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Baker Institute. We have a very special event this evening. Our guest speaker, after his presentation, has agreed to take questions and answers which he will field directly from you, from the audience. And then he will be available to sign his book immediately following the presentation, right in the lobby area where you came in, and there's a stand there with books to be signed. Many of you know our guest speaker. Tom Friedman lived in Beirut from June '79 to May '81, when he was hired by the New York Times and brought back to New York. And then he worked as a general assignment financial reporter and specialized in OPEC and oil-related news. And in 1982, he was assigned to be the Beirut bureau chief, a post he took up 6 weeks before the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. In '84, Tom was transferred from Beirut to Jerusalem, where he served as the New York Times Israel bureau chief until 1988, when he was awarded a Guggenheim Foundation Fellowship to write a book about his reflections on the Middle East. In 1989, he published that book, From Beirut to Jerusalem, which was on the New York Times bestseller list for 12 months and won the 1989 National Book Award for nonfiction and the 1989 Overseas Press Club Award. I was telling Tom his plane was thwarted because of the terrible storm we had this morning, and so he had to rent a car and drive from San Antonio to Houston. So his next book will be From San Antonio to Houston. In January '89, Tom took up a new assignment in Washington as the New York Times chief diplomatic correspondent. For the next 4 years, he traveled he has this wrong in his bio. He traveled with the Secretary of State, James A. Baker III. He has 500,000 miles, but Mr. Baker's just corrected him. It's 700,000 miles. 700,000 miles. And and he also has that he covered Secretary of State James A. Baker. I like that phrase, how he covered the Secretary of State. In November '92, Tom shifted to domestic politics and was appointed chief White House correspondent. He covered the transition and first year of the Clinton administration. I'm not going to put a political spin on this while he only covered it for 1 year. But in '94, he shifted again, this time to economics, where he's really making a name for himself, and became the New York Times international economics correspondent, covering the nexus between foreign policy and trade policy. And then in '95, he became the New York Times foreign affairs columnist, only the 5th person to hold that post in the New York Times' history. He's received the 1983 Pulitzer Prize for international reporting for his coverage of the Middle East, and the 1988 Pulitzer Prize for international reporting. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in greeting Tom Friedman.
Thank you, Ed. It's a treat. It really is a treat for me to be here. I've been looking forward to this leg of my book tour for a long time, in high part because I did travel some 700,000 miles. It felt like 1 million, actually, Mr. Secretary, with Secretary Baker. And it was, for me, just one of the high points of my life to see the end of the Cold War from, it wasn't the front row, but I was at least in the theater. And to be back here now in this institute named after someone for whom I have deep, deep respect is a great honor for me. And I'm really privileged to be here. And I also want to thank Ed Dirigian. The three of us spent a lot of time on airplanes together for arranging this and for having me here. It really is a treat for me. I'm going to talk today about my book, The Lexus and the Olive Tree. And I always like to begin my talk about the book by talking about my job as the foreign affairs columnist. I have the best job in the world. I mean, somebody has to have it. I've got it, and you don't. It's really that simple. I get to be what I call a tourist with an attitude. I get to travel wherever I want, whenever I want, and have whatever attitudes I want. There's only one downside of this job. I have to have attitudes twice a week. In fact, in my case, I have to have them every Tuesday and Friday. And so the big question for me, the big challenge when I started this job is, what attitudes? Now, as Ed said, I'm the 5th foreign affairs columnist in the history of the Times. The first was a woman named Anne O'Hare McCormick. And Anne McCormick began in the 1930s, according to her highly politically incorrect obit in the New York Times. She got her start accompanying her husband, who is an engineer from Dayton, Ohio, on buying trips to Europe. And the Times hired her first as a stringer and then a writer, and finally named her the first foreign affairs columnist, and her column was called In Europe. Because after all, In Europe was foreign affairs in those days for the New York Times. Well, her super story, the kind of framework within which she shaped her attitudes, was the crumbling of Versailles Europe and World War II. Her successors then had the Cold War as their super story, the framework for their attitudes. I came along in January 1995 when we were in this post-Cold War world, and it wasn't clear what would be the framework for my attitudes. And the Lexus and the olive tree is really the answer that I came up with after almost 5 years of doing this column. And the answer, in short, is as follows. This thing called, well, for the last 10 years, we've been speaking about the post-Cold War world. We have been describing the world by what it isn't because we didn't know what it was. So we just kept calling it the post-Cold War world. The Lexus and the olive tree is an argument for what it is. The statute of limitations on calling this the post-Cold War world has officially run out. And it's time we called it by what it is. The argument of this book is that globalization, this integration of finance and markets and technologies that is shrinking the world from a size medium to a size small. This is not just a trend. It's not just some economic fad. It's not some Nintendo game. It is the international system that has replaced the Cold War system. We are in a new international system. That's what globalization represents. Now, the Cold War system was characterized by one overarching feature: division. The world was a divided place, and all your threats and opportunities in that system grew from who you were divided from. And it was symbolized by a single symbol, the wall. The globalization system is also characterized by one overarching feature: integration. In this new system, all your threats and opportunities now flow from who you're connected to, and it is symbolized by a single word: the web. So we've gone from a world of division and wall to a world of integration and web. In the Cold War, we reached for the hotline, which was a symbol that we were all divided, but at least two people were in charge: the United States and the Soviet Union. In globalization, we reach for the internet, which is a symbol that we're all connected and nobody's in charge. That's what's scary about this system. It's just like the internet. We're all connected, but nobody's quite in charge. Now, if the Cold War had been a sport, it would have been sumo wrestling. Two big fat guys in a ring, lots of ritual grunting and stomping around, not a lot of contact though, until the very end when one fat guy pushes the other fat guy out of the ring. If globalization were a sport, it would be the 100-meter dash over and over and over. And if you lose by 1/100th of a second, it's like you lost by a week. And the only thing that victory guarantees is that you get to race again the next day. In the Cold War, the biggest question we asked was, how big is your missile? In globalization, the first question we ask is, how fast is your modem? In the Cold War, the ideal document was the treaty. In globalization, the ideal document is the deal. The Cold War was about weight. Globalization is about speed. The Cold War was about E equals MC squared. Globalization is about Moore's law, that the speed of microchips will double every 18 to 24 months. Two very different systems. The ideal economists for the Cold War were Marx and Keynes. They wanted to tame capitalism. The ideal economists for globalization are Schumpeter and Andy Grove. Schumpeter, who argued that capitalism was about creative destruction, the ability to shoot the wounded and quickly transfer their dead capital to more efficient producers. And Andy Grove, who took the title of his book from Schumpeter's insight, Only the Paranoid Survive. Andy Grove, the chairman of Intel. Now, what really distinguishes these two systems, though, is the nature of power. The Cold War system was a system built almost entirely around states. You acted on the world through your state, and the front page of the New York Times or the Houston Chronicle was the story of states balancing, acting, interacting, clashing with states. What is different about the globalization system is that instead of there just being one balance, states and states, we now have three balances. The first is states and states. The balance of power between states still matters. NATO balancing Yugoslavia, China balancing Russia, Japan balancing Korea. That still matters. States and states. But now we have two new balances. The first is states and what I call the supermarkets. The supermarkets are the 25 largest global stock and bond markets around the world, which today have become autonomous political actors. The United States can destroy you by dropping bombs. The supermarkets can destroy you by downgrading your bonds. Who ousted Suharto in Indonesia? It was not another state. It was the supermarkets. So now we have states and states, states and supermarkets. But what really makes the globalization system unique is that we now have states and what I call super empowered individuals. What happens when you blow away all the walls and you wire the world is that individuals can now act on the world stage directly, unmediated by a state. Individuals can become super empowered. Jody Williams won the Nobel Peace Prize last year for organizing a global ban on landmines. She did it against the wishes of the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. The United States, Britain, France, China, and Russia. How did she do it? Well, when asked that question, she had a simple answer: email. She built one email coalition on another. Remember the story last year of Time Warner, CNN put out called Tailwind, that American troops during the Vietnam War used poison gas? Well, Time Warner, CNN, the biggest media conglomerate in the world, had a military advisor. His name was General Perry Smith, a retired general. He said, this story's bogus. If you run this story, I'm going to quit. And big fat Time Warner CNN said, bye-bye. We are Time Warner CNN. We stand by our story. We don't take orders from some retired general. Perry Smith went home, got on his email network, emailed his 5 closest general friends. They emailed their 5 closest colonel friends. They emailed their 5 closest major friends. Within 7 days, using email, not even the Freedom of Information Act, they put together a dossier so compelling that big, fat Time Warner CNN got down on their knees, apologized for the story, and begged for mercy. 5 retired generals with email brought down the biggest media conglomerate in the world. They're all super empowered good guys. Unfortunately, there are also now super empowered angry men. Osama bin Laden, who was responsible for blowing up the 2 American embassies in Africa, had his own global network, a kind of jihad online. He used that to blow up our embassies. And what did we do? We fired 16 cruise missiles at a person. American B-52s launched 16 cruise missiles at $1 million a copy at Osama bin Laden. It was a superpower against a super empowered angry man. Remember Ramzi Youssef, the guy who wanted to blow up the World Trade Center in New York, 2 tallest buildings in America? I always wondered, what did Ramzi Youssef want? Did he want a Palestinian state in Brooklyn? Did he want an Islamic Republic in New Jersey? I mean, like, what did this guy want? So for my book, I went back to the court records to find out, what did he want? He was trying to blow up the 2 tallest buildings in America. Well, what he wanted was to blow up the 2 tallest buildings in America. Period, paragraph, full stop. Globalization as Americanization had gotten in his face, and it had empowered him as an individual to do something about it. And how did we get Ramzi Youssef? Well, we're first very lucky because one of his associates unbelievably went back to the Ryder Truck Agency and asked for the $400 deposit on the truck they used to blow up the building, which itself is a wonderful story about how you sort of blow up America in the morning and then use American contract law in the afternoon to get the deposit back. But the real story was that the FBI tracked Ramzi Youssef to his apartment in the Philippines. They broke in and found all his plots on the C drive of his Toshiba laptop. He was a super empowered, angry man. So now we have states and states, states and supermarkets, and states and super empowered individuals, all interacting with one another. And that's what makes my job both fun, fascinating, and challenging. But it's what makes this system often so much more complex to manage and to analyze. Now, if my girls were here, the next question they would ask is, Daddy, where did globalization come from? And another way of asking that question is, what blew away all the walls? What blew away all the walls? Well, what I argue in the book is what blew away the walls were 3 simultaneous, I call them democratizations, that were born in the Cold War, nurtured in the Cold War, gained strength in the Cold War, and finally came together at the end of the 1980s in a whirlwind strong enough to blow away all the walls. Now, there were 3. I'll go through them quickly. The first is what I call the democratization of finance. There was nothing more anti-democratic in this country in the 1950s than bank lending. To get a bank loan, you often needed to have an in at the bank or know somebody at the bank. Thanks first to the creation of a commercial paper market and the home mortgage security market, Michael Milken's junk bond market, right up to David Bowie, the rock star, last year issuing $55 million in David Bowie bonds. You too can be rated AAA. Finance through securitization has been democratized. The second thing that got democratized was technology through the phenomena of digitization. Digitization is the wizardry by which we turn words and music and data into ones and zeros, transmit them over modems, and they pop out on the other end as perfect replicas of those words, music, and data. And that has given us the whole personal computer revolution. The third democratization is the democratization of information, thanks to cell phones, satellites, and fiber optics. We all increasingly know how each other lives. The days when Pravda could run a picture of Americans waiting outside of Zabar's Delicatessen in New York at 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning for the deli to open under the caption, "Look, bread lines in America too." Okay. Those days are over. Don't try that trick at home, kids. You can't do that anymore because information has increasingly been democratized. What happened is that these three democratizations, if you want to see them in their undiluted essence, when you go home tonight, call up the E-Trade website or Charles Schwab's website. What will you see? First thing you'll see is that you can buy, sell, short or long, put or call any stock, bond, or currency in the world. Second, you will discover you can do it from your kid's bedroom. Third, you will discover that E-Trade will give you free all the analytics you need, all the reports, analyses. They'll even run a graph for you on the yield spreads. Information that 10 years ago they would have charged you an arm and a leg or only given their best clients. The finance has been democratized, the technology has been democratized, the information has been democratized. Now, when these three democratizations came together at the end of the 1980s, they created an incredible set of new efficiencies in the marketplace. Efficiencies that we are just beginning to still understand, and they created a whole new place to do business called cyberspace. If your country or company understood those efficiencies, absorbed them, internalized them, and applied them, you thrived in this new era. If you didn't, the Berlin Wall fell on you. The argument of my book is that the fall of the Berlin Wall was not a European event. It was a universal event. Any fat, bloated, sclerotic, overweight country or company that could not respond to the new efficiencies created as a result of the democratization of finance, technology, and information had the Berlin Wall fall on it. And that is why it is not an accident that IBM, General Motors, the Soviet Union, and East Germany all tanked at the same time. They all basically suffered from the same threat. You know, we're in the town of, home of Compaq Computer, and I actually profile Compaq in the book. One of the sub-themes of this book is that when your country joins this global system, when you kind of plug into it, it's the equivalent of taking your country public. It's like turning your country into a public company. And therefore, I argued that the attributes and assets of companies and countries are going to begin to converge. So I have a chapter in the book called Buy Taiwan, Hold Italy, Sell France. And it's about if countries were companies, who would you want to buy, who would you want to hold, and who would you want to short? So to do that chapter, I came down and actually profiled Compaq. Now, I don't know if you are familiar how Compaq got created, but back in 1986, Intel came out with something called the 386 chip, which was faster than the 286 chip. And they came to IBM, big, fat, big, blue IBM, which lived in a world of walls where the barriers to entry were very high in their business. And they came to IBM and said, we've got the 386 chip, run with it. And IBM said, look, you know, we just came out with a new computer called the AT. Remember the IBM AT? It stood for Advanced Technology. And IBM had promised its customers that if they bought an AT, they wouldn't have to buy a new computer for 5 years. Can you imagine a computer company telling their customers they won't have to buy a new computer for 5 months today? But it was a world of walls, and the barriers to entry were high, and IBM said to Intel, see you later, put that 386 chip back on the shelf. Little company down in Houston called Compaq, spelled the name funny with a Q on the end, said, we'll take that chip. And in a period of 24 months, they almost killed IBM in the personal computer end of the market. And now we get to the moving parts of this new system. When the walls fall, the new system gets created. And let me describe to you then the 4 parts of this system and how they affect things. When the walls fall, what happens? The barriers to entry in everybody's business collapse. And when that happens, we are all in each other's business. And when that happens, the speed from which you move from having a high value added product or service to having that turned into a commodity that anyone can sell or make, and the only differentiation is price, the speed from which that moves, in the Cold War world of walls, that happened at 10 miles an hour. In a world without walls, it happens at 110 miles an hour. And fasten your seatbelts and put your seat backs and tray tables into a fixed upright position, because with the internet, that's now going to go from 110 miles an hour to 210 miles an hour. Now, the best way I can explain this to you is through a real chain of events that happened to me, which I talk about in the book. I was flying on an airline last year, and I picked up the airline magazine, and there was an ad in there for the Sony Mavica camera. I thought, isn't that neat? Sony makes cameras. I didn't know Sony made cameras. I thought they did CDs and Walkman and stuff like that. Oh, it was a very interesting ad. In fact, it tells you everything you need to know about this new world. It had 3 pictures in it. The first is of the Sony Mavica camera, and under it, it says, "This is your camera." Next to it is a 3.5-inch floppy disk. Under that, it says, "This is your film." Next to that is a computer with a baby picture on it. And under that, it says, "This is your post office." Now, what is that ad telling us? What it's telling us is, in a world when everything can be digitized and sent over a modem, including your vacation and baby pictures, Sony's a digits company. I mean, they were used to digitizing music, but what the heck? We can digitize anything, so why not be Kodak? And while we're digitizing, maybe we could also be FedEx and transmit these pictures that we've digitized over our computers between you and your grandchildren. We are Sony, we are Kodak, we are FedEx. So I saw that ad, and I'm thinking, wonder how Kodak feels about this. Driving along in my car one day, I hear an ad for Kodak. They're boasting about all their online computer services. They're talking like a computer company now. So then I come down here to Houston to profile the people at Compaq, and I say to them, how do you feel about Kodak kind of talking like a computer? They say, we're not worried about Kodak. We at Compaq now, we're like a consulting. We do business solutions. Have you ever seen a Compaq ad? No, they barely show computer pictures anymore. It says Compaq Better Answers. Oh, you do business solutions. So a couple weeks later, I'm back in Washington playing golf with a friend of mine who works for PricewaterhouseCoopers. I say to him, I thought you guys did business solutions. He says, well, we're not worried about Compaq, but we're worried about Goldman Sachs because they're now doing tax derivatives. So he suggests I go read a book. I go home, tell my wife, say, Ann, I'm going to go to Borders, get a book. She says, don't go to Borders, go to Borderless Books, Amazon.com. So I go downstairs, I call up Amazon.com. What do I see? The first thing on their screen, they're now selling CDs. I say, wait a minute, wasn't that Sony's business? So I told this story to the booksellers at Farrar, Straus & Giroux, my publisher. A guy raises his hand, he says, Mr. Friedman, I am the chief bookseller for Farrar, Straus, Mark Gates in the Midwest. I just came from Brooks Brothers department store. I'm in the men's suit department. I see they're selling Michael Jordan's book there for 40% off on a stack of men's suits. I go up to the head of the department. I say, how would you like it if I sold men's suits in my bookstores? He says, have you looked at your Con Ed electric bill lately? Con Ed is offering you the Jordan book for Christmas at 40% off, and you can charge it on your electric bill. When the walls fall, we are all in each other's business. There was a wonderful story about AT&T in our business section this week, about all the things they're doing in all these different directions. It was a wonderful headline. I don't know who thought it up. I wish I had. It was Ma Everything. Okay? Not Ma Bell, Ma Everything. And when that happens, the speed from which you move from innovation to commoditization gets turbocharged. And now we get back to Schumpeter. Because if you're not good at creative destruction, if you're not good at shooting the wounded and taking their capital and quickly reassigning it to more efficient producers, if you're called Japan and for cultural, traditional, historical, social reasons you don't shoot the wounded, you put them on respirators forever, you will have a problem in this new system. I was at the Davos World Economic Forum this year, and there was a press breakfast for Bill Gates. And all the reporters there were asking him, Mr. Gates, these internet stocks, they're a bubble, right? I mean, surely they're a bubble. They must be a bubble. I mean, they're obviously a bubble. And finally he said, look, you bozos, of course they're a bubble. Anyone who knows anything about the world of technology knows that you can't project your income stream 10 years out. I don't know if I'm going to be here in 4 years. But you're missing the point, he says. Because this bubble is pouring so much capital into this new industry, it is going to drive innovation faster and faster. That afternoon, I went to interview Hosni Mubarak, the president of Egypt. And afterwards, I was sitting around with some Egyptian friends talking about what the president said. One of his Egyptian news editor, who I know and heard me speak about this at the World Bank, he said, Mr. Tom, we understand now we've got to get on this globalization train, but could you slow it down a little bit for us? I said, Matt, I'd love to slow it down, and especially for you, but there's nobody driving. In the morning, Bill Gates tells me this train is going to get faster and faster. And in the afternoon, Imad of Egypt wants to get on, but he needs someone to slow it down. And that's one of the real tensions inside this system. So the walls fall. That's the first part. Let me just take a sip here. The three other parts to this system that are important to understand. The first is a new political garment that is created in this system. It's what I call the Golden Straitjacket. When your country plugs into this global economy today, it puts on what I call the Golden Straitjacket. The Golden Straitjacket are all the rules, the economic rules of this system. Rules about deficit to GDP ratios, inflation, privatization, deregulation, all the things that basically make up neoliberal economics. Margaret Thatcher was the original seamstress of the Golden Straitjacket. And President Reagan basically picked up on it, and the two of them together basically universalized this as the new garment of the globalization era. Now, when your country puts on the Golden Straitjacket, two things happen. One is your economy tends to grow from more privatization, deregulation, competition, foreign investment, and trade. Your economy grows and your politics shrinks. Your economy grows and your political choices narrow to Pepsi or Coke, to mere nuances. Would somebody please tell me what was the difference between Clinton and Dole 2 years ago? Oh, Dole wanted to put some padding in the shoulder. Clinton said he would grow the middle a little bit, but basically they were in an argument over the tailoring of a golden straitjacket. Paddy Ashdown, the third-party leader in Britain, the Liberal Party leader, he had it perfect. He looked at Blair and Major 2 years ago and said, synchronized swimming. I see synchronized swimming now wherever I go where countries have put on the golden straitjacket. Now, the third element of this new system is a new energy source, what I call the electronic herd. The herd is all the investors from any of you at home with your E-Trade websites right up to Mitsubishi Bank, Chase Manhattan, and the big multinational companies. In the Cold War, a herd existed, but the world was too chopped up and divided up. It couldn't gather, grow, and gain strength. But when the walls got blown away, this herd could gather, grow, and gain strength. And it has become the energy source now of this new system. You cannot thrive in this new system where governments are increasingly running balanced budgets. You cannot get the knowledge and the energy to grow, let alone the finances, without plugging into the electronic herd. And this leads to the fourth element of the system, which is basically how you interact with the herd. That is now central to international relations today. How do you get the most out of this high voltage wire without being fried to a crisp by it? Now, I like to compare countries to computers. And it's as though for the first time in history, we all have the same piece of hardware, what I would call free markets. We all kind of have the same hardware today. For the first time, Russia has free markets and China has free markets and Mexico has free markets and Thailand has free markets. The question today is who will get the operating system and the software to go with those free markets, so when you plug into the herd, you get the most out of it and you cushion the worst. Now, operating system in my lexicon is all the economic rules of the Golden Straitjacket. Software are the rule of law, commercial courts, oversight and regulatory institutions. And the question is, who will get the operating system and the software to go with the hardware free markets? Russia was like a piece of hardware plugged into the electronic herd with no operating system and no software inside. And when the herd surged, it melted down whatever tangled mess of wires was the Russian economy. Thailand, Korea, Malaysia, Indonesia were computers plugged into the electronic herd, but with a very slow operating system, what I call DOS Capital 1.0. Now, DOS Capital 1.0 is great for getting your country from $500 per capita income to $5,000. But when you want to go from 5,000 to 10,000 and the herd moves from a 286 chip to a Pentium 3, and you're still there using DOS Capital 1.0, what happens is what happens if you try to run Windows 98 on your old 286 computer. A little sign pops up and says, you have misallocated all your resources, cannot move capital, please download new operating system and software. And that is what Thailand, Malaysia, Korea, and Indonesia are involved in today. I think somebody's got a pitch, something. I hear a real high pitch. Can they adjust it? Sorry. Is it still? Thanks. It's globalization, the democratization of technology. Thanks. So that's the system. That's basically the system. Now let me talk quickly about two sort of elements of the backlash against this system, and then we'll open it up for questions. One, I have a chapter in the book which is quite relevant for this week. It's called "The Revolution is Us," U period, S period. And it's basically about the backlash against the United States that I detect all over the world. Not because of our military prowess, but because we are the drivers of this system. Americans have a self-image that we are like the couple in Grant Wood's painting, just sort of mom and dad outside the barn, with the pitchfork in hand. For the rest of the world, though, we are a multicolored Andy Warhol print. We are wild, crazy revolutionaries with rings on our toes and paint on our nose. We come into your country, kick over the table, slam Microsoft Windows in the computer, a cable box on your TV, MTV on the television, fill your kids with ideas you never had, and we tell you download or die. We're the apostles of globalization. We're the high priests of high tech. We want enlargement of our values and our Pizza Huts. And most of all, we want everyone, everywhere, pumping their own gas. Oh, yes. Now we come to Friedman's 5 gas stations theory of the world, which is quite relevant to the China situation today. I believe you can reduce the world economies to 5 gas stations. The first is the Japanese gas station. You drive in, 5 men in uniforms and white gloves wait on you. Gas is $5 a gallon, but they pump it for you, they wash your windows, they fill your tires with air, and they bow politely when you leave and you drive away in peace. Next is the American gas station. Gas is only $1 a gallon, but you pump it yourself. And you drive around the corner 4 blocks away and 4 homeless people take your hubcaps. Third is the Western European gas station. Gas is also $5 a gallon in the Western European gas station. Only one guy works there. He works 32 hours a week. He has 90 minutes off for lunch, at which time the gas station is closed. He only pumps gas. His union contract says he does not do doors. He does not do windows. He does not pump air. He has 6 weeks vacation in Provence every summer. And across the street, his 4 brothers are playing bocce ball on very generous unemployment insurance. Fourth is the developing world gas station. Gas is only 35 cents a gallon there. There are 6 gas pumps only. 1 works, the other 5 are broken. They're waiting for the spare part to be flown in from Europe, where the owner lives as an absentee owner in Zurich in an apartment. He has no idea that the 15 people work there are all relatives and are so destitute they have to shower in the car wash. The only vehicles that use the developing world gas station are of 2 makes, high-end Mercedes-Benzes and little motor scooters. Everybody else comes on bicycle to use the air pump to fill their tires. Last is the communist gas station. Gas is only 50 cents, but there is none. Because the 4 guys working there have sold it all on the black market for $5 a gallon. That's what the world is today, basically, folks. And what is going on a meta scale is that everyone is being forced toward our gas station. And they don't like our gas station. Built into their gas stations are different ethics about the dignity of work, the responsibility of government to provide employment, to guarantee not only opportunities but outcomes. Cultural norms about the right of everyone to have a vacation of a certain length of time at the end of the summer. They don't like our gas station. And for the rest of the world, we are whip in hand driving everyone to our gas station. 3 years ago, I went to Tehran. I stayed at the Homa Hotel in downtown Tehran. I checked in. Over the front door, I noticed the words, "Down with USA." But they weren't a banner. They weren't graffiti. They were tiled into the wall. I looked at that. I thought, Jesus, that's tiled into the wall. That's not coming down like when I leave, you know. This goes very, very deep. And what's interesting, if you follow Iran, and the Iranians are at the very interesting bellwethers of this. The Iranians don't call us the great Satan anymore, all this. They call us the capital of global arrogance. Oh, that's interesting, because I've got a little secret for you. That's what the Japanese now call us. It's what the Chinese now call us. It's what the Germans now call us. It's what the Russians now call us. It's what the Egyptians now call us. For the rest of the world, we are the capital of global arrogance. And how we learn to manage that is going to be a real challenge for American foreign policy. Let me just conclude with one point so we can save time for questions. The penultimate chapter of the book is called, "If You'd Like to Speak to a Human Being, Press 1." Okay? And it's about what are the challenges to this system. Is it irreversible? Are we stuck with it? Is this it? Is it irreversible? And what I've concluded in that chapter is that it's not at all irreversible. And I lay out 5 threats. I will just share with you the first one, because it's also relevant for today. I think the first and biggest threat to this system is what I call just too darn hard. It may be just too darn hard. Now, what the first 10 years of this system have been about, 1989 to 1999, is what if it's too hard for small states, for Liberia, for Algeria, for Yugoslavia? Well, if it's too hard for them, we kind of try to build an iron curtain around them and drive around them like they're a bad neighborhood. I believe what the next 10 years are going to be about is what happens if it's too hard for Russia, what happens if it's too hard for China, and what happens if it's too hard for Japan. What happens if some very big states can't make it? I grew up in an age where the biggest threats to America militarily were the strength of Russia and China, and economically the economic strength of Japan. I believe my girls will grow up, at least for the next 10 years, in a world where the biggest threats to them are going to be the weakness of Russia and China and the weakness of Japan. And managing their weakness much more than their strength as they make the wrenching adjustments to this new system is going to be an enormously challenging task. I argue in the book, I may be wrong, but I'll stake my credibility on it, that, there's a lot of people say China's here today, and in 20 years they're just going to be straight line. They're going to be up here. They're going to go richer and more authoritarian at the same time. To which I say, China is here today, and in 20 years they may be here, but they ain't getting there in a straight line. Not without a big detour over here. Oh, they may get richer, but they ain't going to be more and more authoritarian. They're going to have to open up to get from here to there. And they may get more and more authoritarian, in which case they're not going to get richer. But they're not going to get both at the same time. And the wrenching process they go through of opening up to get there is going to be hugely destabilizing. And we just got the tiniest crumb of taste of it last week. I end that chapter with a cartoon from the New Yorker. It's two Hell's Angels on motorbikes. One says to the other, say, how was your day? And the other says, well, advancing issues led declines. Okay. And that's sort of how I feel about this whole system I've described. Do not confuse my excitement for describing what I have learned for any approval or disapproval of this system. The beginning of wisdom, whether you love it or hate it, is to understand how it works. But I believe America's role as the biggest beneficiary of this system is to ensure that advances lead declines for more people in more countries more of the time. That is our role, and if we do that, we are doing God's work. Thank you very much. Thank you. Floor is open, please. Right here.
In your book, you referred about one of the sad effects of this new globalization, which is, to some degree, the standardization and the homogenization of different cultures.
Yes.
And you also mentioned that this is a pooled phenomenon, that America is not really pushing this on anybody. What would be your recommendations to these different countries that they all want to get richer?
Right.
And to some degree, if they want to get richer, they've got to adapt certain cultures of America.
Yes.
But at the same time, they can
Preserve
maintain their own olive trees.
Yes. It's a good question. Did you all hear that? He wanted to know if my book would be on sale afterward, and it is, and I'm really glad you asked, and thank you. Bless you, son. The question was basically, how do you get the best out of this system and cushion the worst without having your culture and your environment overrun by it? Is that a fair? And actually, the longest chapter in the book deals with that subject. The chapter is called Demolition Man. And the title of the chapter comes from one of the worst movies ever made, a Wesley Snipes, Sylvester Stallone movie. Perversely brilliant in its own way, where Wesley Snipes is a hardened criminal and Sylvester Stallone is the cop, and they make a big mess in LA in 1982, and they get frozen in a cryo prison and unfrozen in Los Angeles in the year 2032 when globalization reigns. And every restaurant is a Taco Bell. There's a wonderful scene in the movie where Sylvester Stallone saves the mayor of the city, and to reward him, they take him to Taco Bell for dinner, and a Barry Manilow-like guy is playing the piano. All songs are only advertising jingles. And he says, I saved the whole city, and my reward is dinner and dancing at Taco Bell. Now, why did I choose that? It actually came from a real-life experience, and this is a long-winded way of answering your question. I was in Qatar 2 years ago for a conference. Tiny Arab oil state on the east coast of Saudi Arabia, richest country in the world actually, sits on a dome of gas. And I was staying at the Sheraton Hotel there, which is on the Persian Gulf. And the first day I was there, I took a walk. They have the finest sort of seafront walkway that I've seen anywhere in the world. It is so beautifully, tastefully done in Islamic culture and style, and Qataris all gather there. And women in native costume, men ululating. It was a wonderful scene. And I was walking along the Corniche, really enjoying my Persian Gulf moment, when I turned the corner and smack in the middle of the Corniche was Taco Bell, with a huge picture of the Emir growing out of the roof. And what's worse, it was crowded. And I thought, oh, geez, I'm here, I'm having my Qatari moment, and I have to meet Taco Bell? Well, 3 weeks later, I went to Malaysia, and I'm staying at the Shangri-La Hotel in Kuala Lumpur. I love that name, the Shangri-La. So it just sounds like some Bob Hope, Bing Crosby movie from the old days. I got in late at night. I get up in the morning, throw my curtains open. I'm on the 15th floor. I look straight across. What's the first thing I see? A 2-story high picture of Colonel Sanders. I thought, oh, I come all the way to Malaysia. I'm staying at the Shangri-La. And the first guy I meet is the Colonel. So I went the next day to interview Anwar Ibrahim, who was then the deputy prime minister, now in jail by Mahathir. And I'm waiting to interview him, and in walks a Malaysian businessman, and his office director says, this is Mr., I forgot his name's in the book, he is the owner of all the Kentucky Fried franchises in Malaysia. So I said, I got to talk to you. I took out my IBM ThinkPad, and I said, look, what is the deal here with Kentucky Fried? And he said, you don't understand. He said, I got people in villages lining up for this. And you know why? It's the cheapest, fastest trip to America they can take. It isn't just about the chicken, you idiot. It's about the whole experience of being modern, being American, being Western, whatever label you want to put. So, as you said, it's push and it's pull. And what I worry about in this system, and that's what the chapter is about in many ways, is what is the software you need to plug in to preserve your culture and environment from the electronic herd. Because if you don't have that, it'll burn a hole right through you faster than anything we've seen in history. Thomas Wolfe said you can't go home again. I fear in this new system you won't be able to leave home again. That everywhere will start to look like everywhere else. That traveling the world will be like going to the zoo and seeing the same animal in every cage, a stuffed animal. There's 2 ways to make a person homeless. One is to take their home. The other is to make their home look like everybody else's home. So this is a real challenge. And what I talk about in the chapter basically are, how do you insulate yourself from this? And there is no single answer. One of the answers I give, and it's in the book, so I won't go through it all so we get to other answers, but one of the is using globalization against itself. Okay, and one of the ways you can do that, I was in Brazil this last summer with Conservation International, and we went down to the Pantanal, which is the world's biggest wetland in southwestern Brazil. It's wetland the size of Wisconsin, where Enron was building a gas pipeline from Bolivia to Sao Paulo. And Enron is working with Conservation International at every joint of that pipeline. Now, why is that? Because they're terrified of the super-empowered environmentalist. Enron knows that one environmentalist NGO gets on the World Wide Web and says, brothers and NGO sisters around the world, you should see what Enron is doing here. And that message goes to someone in New Delhi who is an environmentalist NGO. He also happens to be in the Indian Parliament. He goes down to the floor of the Indian Parliament and says, I have a message from our environmentalist brothers and sisters in Brazil about Enron, which is applying to build a new power plant in Bangalore. And they tie them up in committee for 3 years. So one nice thing about this system is that there is nowhere to hide bad behavior. And that is empowering environmentalists in some very exciting ways too. I'll leave the rest for that chapter, but it's a good and important question. Thank you. Yeah. We'll move around.
One of the things that seems to be a common theme in both the book and in your remarks today is the significance of the individual over the community and how relevant the individual is in this technologically accelerating society. Most of the world functions on a communally based value system. We are unique in the Western world in functioning on an individually based value system. Aren't we going to create a great deal of chaos in the rest of the world by exporting individualism as the price of technological advance?
It's a really good question. That's a really good question. And let me give you some, I don't address that directly, but let me give you just some scattershot reactions. It's a wonderful question, though. You know, I didn't tell you where the book title comes from, and it's relevant to this. I was in Japan in 1992 visiting the Lexus factory in Toyota City. And I went down to, it's about 2 hours by train south of Tokyo. And I visited Lexus. It just blew me away. It was then the cutting-edge car factory in the world. They built the Lexus with 66 human beings and 310 robots. Never seen anything like it. And at the end of the day, I went back to take the bullet train back to Tokyo, and I bought my sushi bento box dinner and a copy of that day's Herald Tribune. And I don't know if Secretary Baker will remember this, but on page 3, there was a story that Margaret Tutwiler, then the State Department spokeswoman, had given interpretation to some 1948 UN resolution on the Palestinian question. I don't even remember what it was. But both the Arabs and Israelis went nuts. And I don't remember why or what the issue was. And so I'm going along on 180 miles an hour on magnets, eating my sushi, reading the Herald Tribune, and I'm thinking to myself, you know, these people whose factory I've just visited, whose train I'm now riding on, are building the greatest luxury car in the world with robots. And these people up here on page 3, whom I know so well, live with so long, love so dearly, are still fighting over who owns which olive tree. And ain't that the post-Cold War world? That half of us are struggling to build a better Lexus, and sometimes literally the other half of us are fighting over who owns which olive tree. Now, olive trees are really important for the reasons I think you were suggesting in your question, because they're what anchor us in the world. They give us the warmth of community, the strength of identity, and the bonds of family and nation. And a tree, you know, without roots will never be stable, as you suggested. But a tree that's only roots will never grow into the world and bear fruit and provide shade. And so the trick in this system is, how do you keep your Lexus and your olive tree in balance? And you've touched on something really fundamental, which is that this system can be very atomizing, because it does empower, you know, individuals in some in ways to, you know, there's a wonderful commercial IBM does, these two guys going off on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere, and the big boss gets out of his limousine and says to the underling, what are you bringing me out here to buy land here? And the guy says, internet. And the boss thinks for a second. He says, internet? Of course, I don't need to be anywhere. I can be out here. And then he goes, internet, I love it, you know. Well, it's great, but he's living now out of his community, maybe in the middle of some prairie somewhere. How do we get that balance? I think that's going to be a real struggle in this new system. I don't have the answers for a lot of things. What I've tried to do in this book, you know, I explain in the book, if this were the Cold War system, we'd be in 1946 today. We understand as much about how this new globalization system is going to work as we understood about the Cold War system in 1946, the year Churchill gave his Iron Curtain speech. So I approach the subject and really serious questions like yours with great humility, because I don't have the answers yet. What I'm trying to do is trigger a debate of people saying, we're in a new system here. I may not have the parts right or how they move exactly right, but let's at least talk about something other than the messy post-Cold War world. There is an architecture out there that's going to affect everything from individuals to communities. Now, I end the book actually with a story, because this is, sometimes some psychoanalyst is going to take Beirut to Jerusalem and this book together and basically put me on the couch. And what Beirut to Jerusalem was about was a Minnesota boy goes to Beirut. Because I grew up in a real community. And so if you'd asked me, like, what did I see in Lebanon? That's why your question really touches me. I saw a community fall apart. Other people maybe saw different things. That's what I saw. This book is Minnesota Boy Does the World, basically. But I sort of come home, wanting to keep the same thing. That's why I end the book with a story that my daughters go to public school in Bethesda, Maryland. And my eldest daughter, Orly, who, when she was in 4th grade, this was 4 years ago, all the 4th and 5th grade choirs in Bethesda at Christmas time had a gathering, all the choirs, 500 kids from the 4th and 5th grades in Montgomery County in Bethesda Town Square. And my wife couldn't go, so she asked me to go, so I went. And when I got there, I found 500 4th and 5th graders in Bethesda Town Square, and the conductor was an African-American man in a Santa Claus outfit. And the first song they sang was the Hanukkah classic Ma'ot Tzur, to the tune of Rock of Ages. So I got home and brought tears to my eyes. And I got home, my wife said, "So how was it?" I said, "Honey, I just saw a black man dressed as Santa Claus directing 500 school kids in the town square of Bethesda, Maryland in Ma'ot Tzur. God bless America." Now, why, and that's why America, and you really see this book, there's a lot of, I'm accused of jingoism, fine. I think America at its best. Columbine is America at its worst, but America at its best balances the Lexus and the olive tree, cyberspace and the backyard barbecue, community and identity, better than any system I know. And we got to work on it all the time. But that's why I believe America is such a value, as a model for the world. And I'm not trying to export something in the political sense. I'm just talking about a way to balance these things from whatever tradition or culture you come from. So, I believe that's the trick. And one of the things, a lot of times on these trips, it's been very interesting for me speaking around the country about the book, the questions you get. And one of the questions I always get is about the internet. And parents always ask, how should I teach my kids about the internet? And the paradox of the internet is that, I've thought recently, after Columbine, that I would like every internet modem that is sold in the future to come with a label on it, big in red letters that would say, "Judgment not included." Judgment not included. Because you come to this network just like it's just whatever you got in your head and your heart. Man, you're going to take from it and get from it whatever you've got as an individual. And therefore, when parents ask me, like, boy, do they need this search engine or that? No. Boy, it's reading, writing, arithmetic, and the right stuff up here and the right stuff here. You got that, you'll get the most out of this system and you'll protect yourself from the worst. But you always got to remember that judgment not included. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. I can see that we could have kept you here really 3 more hours.
I would have stayed.
But the clock is ticking, and we just want to say how delighted with this superb presentation.
Great questions,
And you could see the great audience you have here that's come out. We'd like to leave you with a memento of the Baker Institute.
Thanks very much. Really
Congratulations.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. I'll be outside.